Today is the greatest day because if Jesus never would have come back to life, he wouldn't have been who he said he was. He wouldn't have been who he said he was. He wouldn't have really been God, but he was. He was everything that he said that he was, and so much more. And so the question is this Easter is, how do we live in light of that? How do we live our lives in light of the resurrected Jesus who really does change everything? And I know that maybe if you've been around church, you've heard that phrase a lot. Like we say, Jesus changes everything. And we don't say it to be cliche. We say it because it's true. It's true that if you really allow Jesus into your life, it really does change every part. And sometimes it takes time. Sometimes there may be things that you're going to have to work through. But working through life with Jesus is the best thing ever. And we celebrate this morning who he is, what he did for us, and the fact that we can have direct access to him because of what he did. And you know, when I was a kid, maybe some of you are like me, I had two hobbies that I really liked. One was reading, because I've always been a little bit of a nerd, and the other was watching TV. I loved to watch TV. My parents hated it so much. If I could just watch TV all day, I would. I would sit and watch TV, and when I was a kid, there was standard definition TV. Standard definition. Those of you who are younger, you don't even know. You don't even know. And those of you who are older than me, I know it was much worse for you. I know that it was much, much worse. But standard is kind of my baseline. Standard is my baseline. And I remember, you know, when they're like, we're coming out with HD TV and all this stuff. And I'm like, it can't be better than standard. There's no way it could possibly be better than this. Cole, will you throw that picture on the screen? Yeah, so this is standard, which I thought was so incredible. This is high def. It's a pretty clear difference. There's a pretty clear difference, but you didn't know that there was something better out there until it actually came out, until you were able to see it next to whatever you were used to. And when you look at the HD picture, I mean, man, there's so much more color, there's so much more clarity. I mean, it's almost like if you're a glasses wearer, like I remember when I got glasses for the first time, and I thought, wow, is this what the world looks like? I can see the definition on the leaves, I can read the street signs, and it's this just moment where you go, wow, this is what it can really be like. And you know, when God created the world, today we're going to be looking at the whole Bible. Whoa, the whole Bible in one sermon. And when God created the world, he created everything in like beyond HD quality, like beyond it, in a way that we couldn't even imagine. Everything was perfect. It was perfect. It was beautiful. Imagine, like there was no sin, there was no sickness, there was no darkness, there was nothing like we experience in the world today. But when Adam and Eve chose to sin, it kind of sent us back to standard definition. It was still, you know, okay, but it wasn't as beautiful and as clear as it was meant to be. But from the beginning, God always had a plan. He always had a plan. And in Genesis chapter 1, before Adam and Eve are ever created and they ever sin, we see that he creates definition between the light and the dark. In Genesis 1, verses 1 through 5, you've probably heard these verses. They're the first 5 verses of the Bible, and it tells us this. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good. Take note of that. He saw that the light was good. It's the first thing that he says is good. Then he separated the light from the darkness and called the light day and the darkness night. If you're taking notes in the app, this is the first key point this morning. The world was created to be defined by light. Not to be defined by darkness, but to be defined by light. Notice that God says the light was good. Darkness and emptiness, those were kind of the default, but God spoke light. He spoke words and light appeared. Isn't that incredible? He spoke and the darkness was divided and there was light. And then God, he creates the water, the sky, the land, the animals, and then his greatest creation, people. But the people he created, they really messed everything up, and sin and darkness became a part of our world. But God did have a plan. In Genesis 3:15, he tells of someone who would come to crush sin and be bruised for us. But God doesn't just mention this in this one-off place in Genesis. And this is what's so cool when you read the whole Bible and we look at the whole picture, the whole story of what God was doing. It all weaves together, and it is all pointing toward the coming Messiah, who is Jesus. There are over 300 prophecies about who Jesus was, about what he would come to do, that he would be raised back to life. And there was a mathematician a while back who decided to do this study to see what the probability was that Jesus could fulfill even 1 in 8 of these prophecies. There's 300 total. And the mathematical probability that he could fulfill 1 in 8 was 1 in 10. It's not very great odds. It was actually impossible odds that Jesus would be able to come and fulfill even 1 out of 8, let alone all 300 prophecies that were spoken about him. But how many of you know he came and fulfilled every single one? Every single thing that was spoken about him. He came and he was exactly who he was supposed to be. And God, he was not trying to hide what he was doing. All along, God was telling people what his plan was, about his love for them, about how he was going to send his son. And he reveals himself. He speaks specifically to different people throughout this time. He speaks and uses Abraham. He uses Moses, Esther. He has judges and prophets and kings and priests, all these people who he was using to be able to instruct people, to point them toward him. But God knew that all these people and all these things, they weren't going to be good enough. They were still standard definition. His only option in order to make this right was to send his own son into humanity. And this is exactly what Jesus does. He comes to earth. He fulfills all the prophecies about him, like that he would be born to a virgin, like that he would come from the line of David and would be born in Bethlehem. He lives a perfect, sinless life. He faces temptation. He feels anger. He feels sorrow. He feels joy. He experiences the whole spectrum of human emotions. But yet he lives up to be exactly who he was supposed to be. And even with his own disciples, Jesus tells them what's going on. He is defining for them who he is, what his purpose is. And multiple times he tells them, like, look, I've come to die. And they couldn't understand it. They couldn't understand it. They couldn't grasp it. And even when he actually dies and he does the things that he said he would, they thought he was dead for good. The disciples, they run and hide. They're devastated because they couldn't understand somebody who could really fulfill all these different things. The second key point this morning, if you're taking notes, Jesus, he didn't just come to bring light. He came as the light. He came as the light to be the literal physical embodiment of what light was. And I love this next part of my message. This is when you read the Bible, there's so much that's so cool. And in John 8:12, there's this famous verse, and Jesus speaks to the people, and he tells them this. He says, I am the light of the world. If you follow me, you won't have to walk in darkness, because you will have the light that leads to life. Now, here's what's crazy about that statement. You're like, cool, you're the light, we get it, that's awesome. Jesus is standing in the middle of the temple during the Feast of Tabernacles. And I know you're like, what is the Feast of Tabernacles? The Feast of Tabernacles was this time where they would remember the things that God had done for them, and they would also look ahead to the coming Messiah. And one of the main themes and elements behind the Feast of Tabernacles was light. And so they would light these 4 huge menorahs every night as they would gather together, and they would remember how God had brought them through the wilderness. He had used Moses to bring them out, and he led them with a pillar of fire by night. They would also celebrate and remember how God had promised them freedom in the future, when he would send the Messiah, the true light, to come and save them once again. And so Jesus stands up in the middle of this feast. Now do you get why all the religious leaders, they're so mad at him? Because he's declaring that he's the light that they were longing for. He is the light that the scriptures talked about. He is the light that God promised. And they're like, hold up. You could not possibly be the light. And what makes them even madder is the way that Jesus defines who he is. Check this out. So Jesus says, I am the light. How did God often refer to himself in the Old Testament, specifically with Moses? As the I am. in Exodus, and I put it in the notes, but it won't be on the screen, but in Exodus 13 through 15, God, he comes to Moses and he shows up to him, and Moses is just this like normal dude, and he's like, you're going to bring all of our people out of slavery in Egypt. And Moses is going back and forth with God, and he's like, I don't want to do that. I'm not skilled enough. I don't even know. But the last thing he says, who am I supposed to say sent me? And God tells him to say that the I am sent you. And so Jesus says, I am the light, meaning I am acknowledging I am God. I am the light that has come, which is such a cool moment. He's openly declaring that he is the Messiah and he is here and he is really about to change everything. And as he says in Matthew 5:17, Jesus did not come to get rid of the law or the prophets. He wasn't coming trying to destroy their whole worlds and ruin their lives. He was coming to fulfill them. He was coming to bring a better way that they weren't going to have to rely on the things that they'd been relying on. They weren't going to have to go through a priest in order to get to God. They were going to be able to talk to him directly themselves and to be forgiven. He was about to take everything from standard to HD, and it was going to be beautiful. Many people believed him, and many didn't. There were a lot of people who didn't. And ultimately, all the people who didn't believe him, they thought he was a fake. They thought he was a fraud. They thought he was someone coming to just stir up trouble. They had him put on trial, beaten within an inch of his life, and then publicly executed on a cross. But even in this moment, this was all God's plan. It was God's plan that Jesus would come, and he would not be understood. He would be beaten and bruised for us, just as he said in Genesis 3. And he would die, being the perfect sacrifice for each and every one of us. In Matthew 27, we have the account of Jesus' death. And it won't be on the screen. If you have the app, you can read along in there if you'd like. But I want you to listen this morning to Jesus' final moments. From noon until 3 p.m, darkness came over the land. About 3 p.m, Jesus cries out in a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And the people who are there, they would have known, because they knew the scriptures, that he's quoting Psalm 22:1. He's quoting David. And he's asking where God is. And we know that God is there with him in that moment. God did not leave him. But Jesus, with the weight of sin and the weight of everything on him, calls back to this moment. When the people standing there heard this, they said, he's calling Elijah, and they run, they get him a sponge and fill it with wine vinegar, which would have kind of numbed the pain. They put it on a staff and offered it to him to drink. The rest of the people were like, leave him alone, let's see if Elijah comes to save him. When Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And this, again, is a really significant moment, and it makes me choke up, because the temple and the curtain, normal people were not allowed to go into that part of the temple. Only the high priest would have been able to go back there. And literally at the moment when Jesus gives his life, the curtain is split, being this just perfect representation of how every person can have access now directly to God. But even cooler, the earth shook, the rocks split, and tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. Imagine this, you're in the city, and all these people who you knew were dead come walking into the city. When the centurion and those who were with him guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, "Surely he was the Son of God." Surely he was exactly who he said he was. And even in the midst of all this darkness, the light of the world came and gave his life for us, and it changed everything. It changed everything. It split that curtain. It split that barrier that was existing between us and God. And it meant that we could have a new life through Christ. But all the disciples and everybody watching, they thought that it was over. They thought that it was over. They were hopeless. They were terrified. They thought, we've just given 3 years of our life following this guy around. We thought this was real, and now he's dead. And in Matthew 28, it says, after the Sabbath, so Friday, Jesus dies. Saturday is the Sabbath, and the Sabbath is incredibly holy. You didn't do any work. You didn't do any work on the Sabbath. When I was a college student, I was able to go to Israel, and it was like the coolest and weirdest thing, but on the Sabbath, the whole city just gets quiet. People aren't even really driving around. They're not out on the streets because they would really observe that it was a holy day. You did no work. So they bury Jesus on Friday. They're not able to do all the proper embalming and all that kind of stuff because the Sabbath was coming. And so they go and they're home on Saturday on the Sabbath. They're depressed. But on Sunday, at dawn, Mary and Mary go to the tomb. And know that Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were two people who Jesus had changed everything for them. He had changed everything for them. He saw them, he gave them value, and so they are the first ones up. And they head to the tomb, where again there's a violent earthquake. And an angel of the Lord comes down from heaven, goes to the tomb, rolls back the stone, and sits on it. I'm just like, picture yourself in these moments, and you're seeing dead people in the streets, there's all these earthquakes, and then you show up to the tomb to try to finish preparing Jesus' body for burial, and there's an angel just sitting on the stone, and it's been rolled away from the entrance. How incredible. His appearance was like lightning. His clothes were white as snow. The guards who they had placed at the tombs, because they didn't want anybody to come steal Jesus' body and be able to try to say that he had come back to life, so they had this huge stone. They had all these guards. And the guards, they run off. And the angel says to the woman, "Do not be afraid. I know you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here. He is risen." Just as he said. That's my favorite part of this whole thing. Just as he said. From Genesis until here, God had been communicating exactly what was going to happen. And it all happened exactly as he said. He says, "Go quickly and tell his disciples he has been raised from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him." So the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy, and ran to tell the disciples. But they didn't get very far because Jesus himself met them on the road. I have to think Jesus just couldn't resist popping up and showing them himself, that he was back. That he was back, that they really could say, "We saw him." He tells them, "Greetings." They came to him, they hugged him and worshiped him, and Jesus said to them, "Don't be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and I'll meet them there." Jesus, as the students would say, he did the most. He did it all. He did everything that he said that he would. No longer did people have to go to a priest. No longer did they have to offer animal sacrifices to atone for their sins. And man, am I glad about that, because I don't think I would have been able to live in that kind of world. They didn't have to be able to do all these different things in order to be made right. They could go directly to God themselves. His birth, his life, and his death really did change everything. And his resurrection was just the icing on the cake. When we look at our lives, deciding to follow Jesus is not a one-time upgrade. It's not a one-time upgrade. It is a lifetime of transformation that brings so much beauty and purpose into your life when you're willing to really let Jesus in. And I know I've been talking about a lot of TV definitions and stuff today, and I'm not a tech person. I know enough to get me by. But I did learn about TV definitions this week as I prepared for this message. And I remember it was a couple years back and their 4K was coming out, and I thought to myself, once again, how could it be that much better? We put that other picture on the screen. So we've got 4K and 8K. Pretty big difference. And, the reason that there's a big difference, and maybe you know this because you are smart people and I'm just not, but the reason there's a difference is because of these little things called pixels. They're all those little boxes that you can kind of see on that side. And so in order to get a clearer image, you need more pixels. The more pixels there are, the clearer the image becomes. And it's the same in our lives when we follow Jesus. The more that you let Jesus into your life, and you let him just take up every little bit of room that he possibly can, your life really does become clearer. It becomes brighter. It becomes full of joy and peace and strength, and there will still be difficulty. There will still be difficulty. There will still be pain in life. But Jesus, man, he makes everything so clear. He gives us a new definition, a new way to live, a new purpose. And we don't have to settle to live in standard anymore. We can really embrace his love into our lives. But I think sometimes we get really stuck. You know, maybe for you this morning, you're in the room and you're like, I just don't think Jesus could ever help me get out of the place that I'm in. I think this is just how my life's going to be. I don't even have a 4K TV. My TV is busted, you know? And I think Jesus would say to you this morning that he can give you a new TV. He can give you a new life. And there is always more. There is always more. Maybe you've been following Jesus for a long time and you just think, well, this is like as good as it gets. Like, I feel like I'm doing pretty good. You know, I'm doing all these different things. And to you, I think Jesus would say the same thing. There is always more. And I think he would take it even a little further and he would say to you, he would say, oh, you don't even know, but it can get so much better. You think this is good? Just wait and see what I can continue to do in your life the longer that you follow me. I was talking with Taylor actually yesterday, and we were just talking about students, some of the students in our church, and just how we've been able to see them grow over time, over all these years. And we're just so proud of them. We're so proud of them. And it's like in our lives when we're able to look back, can you see the growth that God has done in your life? Can you see the good that's there? And if you say, no, like I really can't, then today can be a fresh start. Today can be a moment where you choose to make a decision and to allow God to begin to change your life little by little. When Jesus took his last breath and said, it is finished, he surrendered his life for us. And until we take our last breath, the beautiful work that he wants to do in our lives is not finished either. Until we take our last breath, he is not done with us yet. And following Jesus is not about just having a one-way ticket into heaven. It's not about knowing that your eternity is secure, though your eternity is secure. It's about living the best that you can and allowing Jesus to make your life so beautiful that he would use your life and do things in your life for the time that you have while you're on earth. And it's all about learning how to be defined by who he says we are. That he is the thing that defines us, not anything else. Not your career, not your family, not your choices, not anything that's happened. It's Jesus who defines your life. It's Jesus who makes it beautiful. He is the light who changes everything. He changes everything. Our final point on the notes this morning, if you're taking them, is this. There is always more. Don't settle for standard. It's really easy to get comfortable. It's really easy to settle, even me, myself. It's easy to just kind of feel like you can go through the motions, that I'm good. But God doesn't just want to make you good. He wants to make you better. He wants to make you better. He wants to illuminate every part of your life. And it all starts with a decision in a moment and then a lifetime of decisions after that. You won't always get it right every day, but it's saying every day to the best of my ability, I want to try to follow Jesus a little closer. I want to try to experience his love on a deeper level. I want to let him in and let him expose with the light of who he is the things that, man, I got to get out of my life, the things that I need to do differently so that I can be more like him. It is really the best way to live. That's why we're so pumped on Easter, because Jesus changed everything. He changed everything. We don't have to stay stuck. We don't have to stay captive to our sin. We don't have to continue to do the same old, same old. We can be made new every single day. Jesus came to change everything, including you. Including you. And he wants to help you and encourage you this morning. So if you're in the room this morning as the worship team comes, and you would say, you know what, I have never in my whole life made a decision to follow Jesus. I've never asked him to come into my life, to forgive me for my sins. I've never asked him to walk with me and help me through life. If you've never experienced that peace, that strength, that joy, even in the midst of sorrow, this morning I want to invite you to make a decision. It's the greatest decision ever. It's the decision to just simply say, yeah. It's kind of all it is. There's not this, big long prayer you got to pray. All that he asks is you acknowledge that he is who he says he is, that he died, he came back to life, and that you want to be forgiven and you want his help in your life. And so with every eye bowed in the room this morning, I want to ask you to just take a minute and just reflect. As you look at your life, is your life defined by Jesus? Is it defined by who he says that he is? Do you really view him as the God who came to earth and lived and died and came back to life for you? Is he just a religious figure to you? Is he maybe someone who you don't even really know at all? But this morning, if you're curious, this morning, if you would say, man, I would love my life to change. I would love my life to change. I want to invite you. No one is looking around. This is a moment just between you and God. I'm not going to single you out. I'm not going to embarrass you. But I think Jesus does. He asks us to make a choice. And so this morning, if you're listening to this and you go, man, I want my life to change starting today, I just want to ask you to slip a hand into the air. I'm going to pray for you. Again, I'm not going to call you out or make you stand up or anything like that. But if you have never made a decision to follow Jesus, or maybe you've walked away from him, he's not really been a part of your life, and this morning you'd like to rededicate your life to him, just slip up a hand. This is really just between you and God. Thank you. Thank you. It's the greatest thing. And Jesus doesn't expect you to be perfect. He doesn't expect you to know all the answers or have it together. He just asks you to invite him in and to let him really do that work in your life. God, for those who raised their hands this morning, we celebrate because these are lives that are changed today. God, maybe there's some in this room who didn't put a hand in the air, but in their hearts, they know that their lives need to change today. God, for each of us, we invite you into our life in a new way this morning. We declare that you are the Son of God. You are everything that you said you would be. You came, you died, you came back to life. And because of it, we can experience true freedom. We can experience hope. We can experience joy. God, would you forgive us? Would you come into our lives more, in a deeper way, in a better way, in a new way? Would we not settle for standard, but would we really allow you to work and move in our lives in a new way this morning? I think there's so many of us who we feel stuck. The last couple of years have been hard. God, help us to just feel some movement in our life today, that we would feel and sense that you want to do a new thing and that we would let you do it. God, we surrender our lives to you, every part of it. We don't want to keep anything back for ourselves. We want you to have it all. God, we thank you for this day, that we just get to celebrate your goodness. We get to celebrate that you always had a plan, that you were always working, that you are always true. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you that I can come directly to you and have a relationship with you. Thank you that we can be made right and that we can experience new life. God, we love you and we thank you this morning. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.